All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the April 8 Notes lecture. Before we get into today's lecture, however, I would like to start off by just giving a bit of an introduction around what 8 Notes is. As many of you have heard, they provide a lot of free resources for students like you who really want to be successful in their VCE. And so the types of resources that they provide can range from like providing study notes to, the lectures, the school holiday lectures that they host, and even, the 8 notes calculator and also all of like the discussion forums. More resources for students who want to take that step further. They offer online tutoring services from really experienced Year 12 students, previous Year 12 students, so graduates, and study guides, and also Ed Unlimited, which is kind of like Netflix but for study guides. And just before we get into the lecture, a small little thanks to all of our sponsors. So a special thanks to La Trobe University and all of our other sponsors who have been able to make these lecture series possible. And also just wanting to underline the early conditional offer that the La Trobe University offers. So you can definitely look into that as well, the Aspire Early Entry Program. But anyways, let's get head on straight into the lecture for today. So as I said before, welcome to the Business Management 3-4 lecture. I am Anandi, and I'll go into a little bit about me so you have a good understanding of who I am. So I hope everyone has had a great year so far in Year 12 and you've gone well with all of your assessments and and all of like the content for all your subjects. I graduated in 2021 and I got an ATAR of 96.25. For business management, this was definitely a subject that I was very passionate about, and so I got a raw 44 in that. I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Commerce at University of Melbourne, so definitely a businessy gal. And also, I am a very strong animal lover. I have a dog called Prince, and usually I do put in a photo of him in the slides, but he's essentially just a Staffy mix, and he's 4 at the moment, and he's turning 5 this October. So today we will be using a Q&A software. This just allows you to ask questions and receive them live. So it is a little bit different to what we normally do. But essentially, I will just be monitoring the chat over the duration of the presentation. And therefore, really make sure that, when you're watching this, if something comes up, if any questions come into your head, just ask me them, type them into wherever possible, and just let me know and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. This is a bit of a breakdown in terms of what we will be covering this lecture, but basically the first hour is going to be spent on the Unit 3 Area Study 1 and Area Study 2. So we'll be covering the whole of Unit 3. So we'll be covering Area Study 1, Area Study 2. And then the second half will be the third area of study in Unit 3. So today we'll just be covering the Unit 3 in its entirety, and sort of spending 1 hour on the first hour on the first 2 area studies, and then the second hour on the third area study, and looking at some exam questions and sort of how to go about answering exam style questions. Okay, so we're going to go straight into Unit 3 Area Study 1. So this is what we are required to know under the unit, under this area of study. I'm not going to go out and read every single dot point individually. You should sort of have a pre-existing sort of idea around what all those are. And so we'll just be going through and sort of refreshing your memory, revising all of those key knowledge points. So the first dot point, or like very early on in this area study, you learn about the types of businesses. And so you would be aware that we have 6 types of businesses, and those are, as you can see on the screen. So we'll go and kind of look into each of those individually. So the first one we have is the sole trader. This is owned by a single individual, and with the sole trader, they're subject to unlimited liability. We'll go through what unlimited liability is, but again, I'll give you a little bit of a hint around what it is. So essentially, if this business structure, if they incur debt or if they, sort of fall into liquidity, that's when their personal assets, the owner's personal assets, can be seized in order to compensate for that. That's sort of what that's the idea of what unlimited liability is. The same thing goes for partnerships. So again, if the business does fall into debt, all of the partners or all of the owners in the partnership, they can have their personal assets seized in order to account for, the business's losses. And this is also owned by 2 to 20 people. So it has to be more than one person. So a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 20 people. With our private limited company, this is when you're talking about shareholders. So it can have up to 50 shareholders. They have limited liability now, on the other hand. So this is when there's no individual people personally liable for the business's losses. It's just the shareholders who sort of just suffer depending on the amount of shares that they hold in the business. And this business structure has perpetuity, which just means that in the case that, the business or like the original owner or, owners leave or, they maybe pass away, the business can continue its life and can continue to run regardless of, what the directors do or how they are, like if they leave the business or if they die. With this business structure, this is a really important point to understand, but they're not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, and this is because the shareholders of the company, like you can only be a shareholder of a private limited company through invitation, and therefore no one from the public can actually just be like, okay, I want to be a shareholder of this private limited company. They have to be invited to be a shareholder, and so that's one reason why it's not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. Then you have the public listed company, and this is where we have more than 50 shareholders. These are often your bigger corporations. They have limited liability again, so similar to the private limited company, they also have perpetuity, which just means, again, business can continue to exist. And this company can be listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So shareholders can be from the public, so literally anyone can become a shareholder, and that is why it's listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, so that people like you and me, they can just become a shareholder with these kinds of companies. Okay, and then we have our social enterprises. So this is where profits are distributed towards a community cause. So it's really important that you are considering like your wording of social enterprise. So a lot of students make the mistake of saying that profits are distributed to the community. That would be incorrect, because social enterprises don't just distribute their profits to anyone and everyone. It's more so directed towards a cause within that community. So it's really important that you word it in the sense that it's distributed towards a community cause. Then we have our government business enterprise. This is where the profits which are returned to the owner, so the government, and usually with the GBE, their main objective is to provide an essential service. So some examples of government business enterprises: you have Vic Roads, you have the Australian Post, you have trying to think of another one. I'm just completely blank. But yeah, Vic Roads, Australian Post, those are your two key government business enterprises. They're pretty good examples for those. Okay, and when we're looking at unlimited versus limited liability, so unlimited liability, basically business and owner consider the same legal entity. Therefore, both business and personal assets can be seized if the business cannot pay its debts. So that's the key disadvantage of sole traders and partnerships. So when you're talking about the advantages and disadvantages, you would want to be talking about unlimited liability for your sole traders and partnerships. For limited liability, so this is where the business and the owners are considered separate legal entities, and therefore shareholders can only lose business assets and not personal assets if the business is unable to pay its debts. And that's the main advantage of your private limited and public limited companies. Okay, a little bit of a activity. Oh my God, I kind of just put in the answer on the next one, but pretend you didn't see that. But one of these definitions for a partnership is incorrect. So have a read of all three of them. I'll give everyone a minute to do this, but just think to yourself which one of these is incorrect. Is it the first, second, or third? The first being that one, and the second being the middle, and then third being the last one. Okay, let us look through the answers. So it's specifically looked at, you need to pay attention to like the wording of each of these definitions. So when you define, describe, or explain a sole trader or partnership, you need to include the word owned. So if you do not include the word owned, then you're not going to get the mark. So that's a key mistake that a lot of students make, is saying that a sole trader or like a partnership is a type of business that is operated by X amount of people. So you should be saying owned instead of operated. So with the second definition, they said both owned and operated. That's fine, but just saying operated is not good enough. So just make sure that you do include the word owned somewhere in your definition. Again, another activity. Both of these definitions of social enterprises, one of these are incorrect. I'll give you 2 minutes to have a read and to think about your answer. Okay, let us have a look. So again, it kind of links back to what I was saying, that you must include in your social enterprise definition, and that is basically saying that their profits are going to be distributed back to a community cause rather than just to the community, because not everyone is getting profits. It's people in need who are sort of benefiting from that. All right, let us now move on to business objectives. Also, just be aware sometimes if there are at any points where you can't see like bits of the text, these slides should be available to you, so you can always open them up in another tab. So I'm just underlining that in case you're like, I can't see a bit of text. You have that available to you as well. All right, so with our business objectives, what are business objectives? So business objectives are goals that provide direction, incentive, and purpose for management and employees within the organization. So we have 7 that we need to know in study design. So the first one is to make a profit, literally just revenue minus expenses, to increase market share. So that's looking at the total sales that a business holds in a particular industry. To improve efficiency, so how well a business uses its resources. To improve effectiveness, sort of the degree to which the business actually achieves its objectives to fulfill a market need. So that's sort of exploiting a gap or niche in the market to fulfill a social need, seeking to address a community cause, and then to meet shareholder expectations. So sort of looking at, profit, growth, transparency, to sort of satisfy the shareholders there. All right, so when we're looking at stakeholders, stakeholders are really anyone with a vested interest in the performance and slash or activities of a business. So again, key word in this definition is to include the word vested, because it's really anyone who has that really vested interest in what the business is doing. We need to know, in terms of like the study design, what each of the stakeholders' interests are. So what are their interests? And then also how these interests might actually conflict with each other. Sort of brainstorming some potential stakeholders, we have employees, management, owners, customers, creditors, government, suppliers, competitors, society/community. In this study design, it does mention specific stakeholders that you need to be aware of. I'm just going back to where it says, yes, so we need to know owners, managers, employees, customers, suppliers, and the general community. So it's really important that you know all of those ones since they've been explicitly listed in the study design. All right, so here are some interests of a couple of stakeholders. So for employees, they really are interested in having stable employment, good wages and conditions. Management, they would really want, good business performance, because if the business is able to perform a lot better, that just reflects positively on them, helps them to ensure future employment. Owners or shareholders, they want high profits, good returns on their investment. If the business is making more profit, that means they're going to get a lot more on their investment in the form of dividends. Customers, they want high quality goods and services at reasonable prices, so they don't want to be overpaying for a good or service where they could get the same thing somewhere else for cheaper. They also want products to be marketed ethically to avoid being deceived or disappointed with what they get. And then we have competitors, so pretty conventional. They would want the competition to do badly. They would want to outperform other businesses in the same sort of field and industry as them. We have suppliers. They want good business performance because then the business can continue being a customer, order supplies from them, and that sort of benefits them because they're going to be making more sales and get more revenue. Awesome. All right. So that's sort of a little bit about stakeholders. Something to think about when thinking of their interests, also sort of considering how they might be in conflict with each other. So a really key one is with shareholders. They want high profits and good returns on their investment. So that means they want the business to be very profitable. And one way a business can be very profitable is minimizing their expenses. So that might be in conflict with the employee interest because they want good wages and conditions. So they would want to be paid fairly, and they would want to be paid, get fair compensation. And so labor wages and employee wages are an expense to the business. So if, a business wants to increase its profits, one way they might do that is by reducing the wages of employees. And that might be, that's a conflict of interest because while it's satisfying shareholders, it's not really satisfying employees. On the other hand, if employees, by raising the wages of employees, that's going to increase expenses, and that's also going to minimize profits as well. So that's going to not satisfy shareholder expectations or the interests of shareholders because profits are now being decreased and they're getting less on their investment. So that's a really key one as well. Another good one is, I guess, also in terms of increasing profits, on the line of increasing profits, the business might decrease the quality of their output or service, and that's going to be a conflict of interest between shareholders and customers because they want high quality goods and services at reasonable prices. You might have heard recently Cadbury, they reduced the grams of chocolates in their bars. And so that kind of highlights the stakeholder interest because they're selling it for the same price, but they're getting less. Customers are getting less of the product. And so shareholders are still getting, that's very profitable for the business because they're producing less, but they're getting the same amount of profit, and they're getting more revenue, while also decreasing their expenses because they're producing less of the chocolate per unit. And so that's benefiting shareholders, but is it really benefiting customers? Not really, because they're not getting as much as what they can be getting. All right, let's now move on to management styles. So with our management styles, we have autocratic, persuasive, consultative, and participative. Let's go through all of them. With autocratic, this is where communication is exclusively downwards and manager makes all the decisions with no feedback. So it's literally, there's a manager, they're making the decisions, and they're just telling all of the employees what the decision is and expects everyone to sort of comply with it. The direction of communication with autocratic is one way, so it's downwards, so it's from the manager to employees. And this management style has centralized decision-making power because it's just the manager making all the decisions. Then we have persuasive. So persuasive is when the manager makes a decision, but then kind of justifies it to employees. Again, it's going to be one way and centralized because manager still just communicating downwards to employees, and still centralized because they're the ones who are making the decision. The only difference now is that they're just justifying it. Then we have consultative. So now employee ideas and opinions are considered before decisions are made. But again, the final decision is still being made by the manager. Now we have two-way communication. So there's upwards and downwards because now employees are also relaying their ideas to the manager and are communicating their ideas to the manager. So you not only have manager communication downwards, but also employee communication upwards. And so even though you have that, ultimately, final decision is still being made by the manager, and so it's still going to be centralized. Participative is when the decision-making power is shared between the manager and employees. So now both parties can engage in two-way communication, but they also have decision-making power as well. And so two-way communication, upwards and downwards between employees and managers, decentralized decision-making power with this participative management style because now both management and employees have equal decision-making power. Our last management style is laissez-faire, and this is when decisions are kind of just left totally up to the group. Managers sort of give up all decision-making responsibility, and it's sort of the employees to have free reins with whatever they want to do. The direction of communication with this one is horizontal because it's just sort of between employees. There's no manager as such that's involved. With the decision-making power, it's decentralized, again, because employees are the ones who are just sort of making all of the decisions now. So hopefully that makes sense. Just to do a quick recap, autocratic, manager making the decisions. Persuasive, manager making the decisions but justifying it to employees. Consultative is when employee ideas are considered before manager makes a decision. Participative, decision-making power shared between manager and employees, so both parties can make decisions. And laissez-faire, totally left up to the group. Anyone and everyone can make decisions. Okay, with our management styles, often in a SAC and exam context, you would be asked to propose an appropriate management style given a case study. So when you are asked to propose a management style, when you are reading the case study, you should consider these 4 things. So what's the nature of the task? Is it classified? Is it open? Is it unpopular? Or is it like a necessary decision, complex or simple? What's the time like? Is there time restraints? Is there a lot of time available, or does a quick decision need to be made? What's the manager preference? So are they a good decision maker? Are they a good leader? What are they like? And then also the experience of employees. So are they experienced? Are they new employees? If they're experienced, maybe they might be able to provide some sort of input. Sort of thinking about those things. All right, then we have our management skills. So with management skills, these are, I feel like they're pretty straightforward, but we have our communication, so literally just the transfer of information between one person to another person, delegation, that process of handing down tasks to subordinates, decision making, where, you're thinking about the alternative solutions to a problem and then sort of just choosing which one's the most appropriate. Planning, sort of taking in advance the steps an organization planning a strategy of steps that the organization will take to reach an objective. Then we have leading, so influencing, motivating staff to achieve organizational objectives, and then interpersonal. So that just involves the ability to relate and empathize with others and build effective relationships. So it's all about building relationships between others in the business. All right. All management styles require communication, just in different ways. This is sort of now thinking about how management styles and management skills sort of can be connected together. So with communication, all of the management styles use communication. And as we kind of broke down all of the management styles, you saw that we kind of labeled them as one-way or two-way communication. So that's sort of an example of how you might link a management skill to a management style. So when you're looking at autocratic and persuasive, they have one-way communication because managers must be able to clearly articulate their instructions and really explain that articulate that to their employees, because it should be clear from the employee's perspective what they're required to do and which decision has been made. Then you have two-way communication, which is applicable to all the other three management styles. And this is when managers must, be able to facilitate discussions between themselves and their employees so that both parties feel comfortable and validated. So when we are labeling them one-way communication and two-way communication, that's sort of what we mean by one-way and two-way. So with one-way, it's just being able to clearly express yourself in terms of your communication to your employees. And then with two-way, it's sort of being able to facilitate discussion, productive discussions, I would say, so that employees feel comfortable and validated in terms of like expressing themselves and their ideas. All right. This is a quick exam question. I am going to skip over this, and we might come back to this maybe towards the end of the lecture. But I put this one in here, maybe if you do want to attempt this after the lecture or in your own time. But it's a good one to sort of apply all of your knowledge in terms of what we've studied. Have a go at this one maybe towards the end of the lecture and or in your own time if we don't get a chance. Okay, and I've put in a bit of a breakdown as well in terms of Vika's notes. So this is again a bit of an elaboration of the question as well. All right, let's move on to corporate culture. So corporate culture is the shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes held by those within the business. So when we're thinking of corporate culture, we need to think of real and official. So real is the actual and established shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes within an organization, and that's reflected through workplace behaviors such as rituals, events, whatever the business sort of celebrates. Official is more so what's presented to the public. So it's the stated and documented outline of the beliefs, values, and attitudes within an organization, and that's reflected through, the business's mission and vision statement. So what the public can see in their eyes. I will say that with real corporate culture, that can only be fully understood through contact with the business. So whether you be an employee, official corporate culture is often understood by the public. So it's sort of how you perceive the business and what you think their culture would be, depending on what you're presented with. So what are some strategies that management can use to develop a desired culture at organization? So there's just some here. Good ones are rituals, management styles, sort of providing training and recruiting and selecting the right staff that will sort of support and uphold the desired culture. Those are some good ones. All right, that was a good quick whiz through the first area of study. let's now move on to the second area of study, which is a little bit more longer. This one looks at primarily human resource management. And as you can see, there's a lot of like theories and different little things you need to remember. So let's go into that. So with this area of study, it's all about the effective management of employees. So when we're breaking down sort of how to tie in managing employees and objectives, this is sort of like a good example of how I would go about linking those. So when you have the effective management of employees, you have a lot more motivation within employees. And so if employees are motivated, they're more likely to stay within the business, and that's going to decrease staff turnover. If employees are motivated, that's also going to help them be a lot more productive and efficient in what they're doing. Both of those things decrease costs. So with turnover, the business doesn't have to spend resources and time in terms of replacing employees. And productive and efficient employees obviously are going to have a lot better business outcomes as well. But decreased costs ultimately helps to increase profits as well. On the other hand, effective management of employees can produce well-trained and effective employees. That's going to tie into our productivity and efficiency again. And that also means that outputs are of high quality. If outputs are of high quality, there's more customer satisfaction, better business reputation, more sales and revenue, and that's going to increase our market share as well. Yeah, so that's sort of like a good example of how you would kind of like break down. With business management, and especially with your answers, you don't just want to jump from point A to point D. You really need to put in the B, C, and E before that. Like you really need to explain the how and the why of your answer, and being very specific so it's clear to the examiner that you know what you're talking about. Okay, when we're looking at motivation is all about the willingness of a person to expend energy and effort into completing a job or task. So we need to consider the relationship between managing employees and business objectives. So when employees are managed with the goal of having them becoming more motivated, the more motivated they are, the better they're able to perform, and they are more productive, and that means there's less inputs for more outputs. You'll learn more about inputs and outputs in the third area study, but that's sort of something to think about is when they're more motivated, they're going to be a lot more productive. That means the input of time, they're spending less time doing their task, and so they're going to create more outputs for less inputs. The more productive the employees are, the more productive the business is, and the more productive the business is, the greater potential they have to achieve the business objectives. So it's really important that, coming back to this first bit, that when managers are, managing employees, they should really at the forefront of their mind sort of try to manage them in terms of having them more motivated, so that, ultimately that does lead to better business outcomes. All right. With our first motivation theory, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you would have known that it's basically just a representation of human needs in the form of a pyramid or a hierarchy. With this pyramid, we have our physiological, safety, social esteem, and self-actualization needs. And they're all sort of ranked in terms of lowest to highest importance in that pyramid. With this theory, it is this unsatisfied need above the employee in the hierarchy that motivates the employee. So kind of linking to the idea that all of these needs need to be fulfilled in sequential order in order to act as motivators to the employee. So if we're being a little bit more specific in terms of how a human resources manager could actually achieve each level, these are some strategies. So with the physiological needs, maybe just providing appropriate wages, giving, good working conditions. It could be as simple as providing like a kitchen in the office, providing, access to clean drinking water, an air conditioning system. With our safety needs, having job security, having a safe workplace, making sure that, regular safety checks are being conducted in the workplace to ensure that there's no threats anything that can jeopardize like the safety of employees. So making sure like structurally maybe the office or the working environment is safe. And then also job security, obviously, ensuring that employees feel a sense of security regarding their job. Then we have our social needs. So, just having friendly associates, a positive corporate culture, maybe, implementing rituals. Every Friday they go out for like a team breakfast or something like that. It could be as simple as that, but, having some sort of rituals to develop positive corporate culture, maybe having like employee of the month, celebrating the birthdays of employees. With our esteem needs, some strategies could be related to like the job titles or responsibilities, maybe implementing some promotions and having access, allowing employees to have access to prestigious facilities. With our self-actualization, providing challenging work, allowing the employee to express their creativity, and also providing opportunities for personal growth as well. Then we have our second motivation theory. So this is the goal setting theory, so Locke and Latham's goal setting theory, and that proposes that motivation is derived from setting and attaining goals and objectives. So with this, all goals should be challenging, they should be set jointly, specific, monitored, and also be given feedback. With each of these ones specifically, so with challenging, it's important that goals are challenging because that demands motivation from employees. It demands hard work. So it's going to cultivate that motivation in order for them to expend that energy in achieving it. Also, we complete goals because it makes us feel accomplished, and therefore completing a challenging goal is more fulfilling because, as people, we strive to overcome challenges. And so when you accomplish challenges, and when you overcome challenges, it can really be quite satisfying and fulfilling. It's also important that it's set jointly because, that allows the management and employees to develop goals together, and it just ensures that the employee goals are aligned with like the business objectives. If the employee has contributed to the creation of their goals, they're more likely to be more specific and effective for the employee. So again, there's no use of managers sort of just setting goals for employees. If the employee is sort of a part of that process, it just ensures that, the employee is capable of achieving that goal. And if they've contributed to it, they're more likely to be motivated in achieving it. It's important that goals are specific because if they're clearly defined and I guess articulated specifically, it avoids that vagueness. And so that means there's just clear direction and the employee knows what to sort of direct their energy and what's expected of them in terms of achieving that goal. It's also important to frequently, check up on how the employee is progressing towards the goal. So I guess that's more so for the manager side in terms of how the employee is tracking, making sure that, they're on track of achieving their goal. And that sort of ties into making sure that employees' motivation is long-term. So sort of supporting the employee in whatever way they can to ensure that. Feedback, so just providing feedback, making the employee feel as though like they're recognized, so that they feel like achieving that goal is worthwhile. Because if they aren't recognized, then they might feel as though achieving that goal had no significance or value to themselves or the business, and that means they're going to be less motivated next time. All right, then we have the 4 drive theory. This just proposes that there's 4 basic motivational needs that act to drive people. And so all 4 needs must be addressed simultaneously for this theory to be effective. So with the 4 drives, we have drive to acquire, bond, learn, and defend. And sort of keeping in mind that the drive to defend is a latent drive. So it's only activated when there's a threat in the workplace. How could a HR manager actually develop these drives? So with the drive to acquire, the manager could reward individual employees with praise, recognition, and interesting assignments, and even just implementing a system where it's linked to performance. So rewards system which links to performance, so maybe like something like performance-related pay. Then we have the drive to bond, and that is, some strategies could be encouraging teamwork, collaborating with tasks, having events and rituals within the business, and, embedding sort of a spirit of openness and pride within the culture of the business as well. With the drive to learn, just making sure tasks are interesting, are challenging, and even just offering training opportunities which allow the employee to develop on their skills and abilities. With our drive to defend, so having a participative management style, having that open communication, decentralized decision making, so that employees also feel very they feel valued and they feel a sense of belonging in the business, especially if they have decision making power as well. Even implementing policies for dispute resolution, so allowing the employee to feel as though there's like a structure in terms of how they could escalate an issue if they feel sort of like a threat is present. And then even just cultivating a supportive workplace also goes a long way as well. Okay, then we have motivation strategies. Make sure that you do not confuse your motivation theories with your motivation strategies. Motivation strategies, you have 5. You have performance-related pay, career advancement, investment in training, support, and sanction. We need to know their effect on short-term and long-term motivation. So basically, performance-related pay is just when employees are monetarily rewarded based on the quality of their performance. And so that's not necessarily going to help with the long term because it's more so of like a materialistic reward. And with your long-term motivation, it often stems from it inherently stems from the employee. So with career advancement, investment in training and support, the employee is sort of has that relationship with the business, and they feel like that belonging, they feel like that purpose, and they genuinely actually want to commit to, their job within the business, and therefore that's gonna help them in terms of providing that long-term motivation. With career advancement, so that's just advancing higher up the career ladder within the business, and that's gonna help with both short-term and long-term motivation. Long-term because the business sees the employee sees a future with the business, they're more likely to stay within the business and really, I guess, strive to do well and progress. Investment in training, so I guess the business providing an opportunity for the employee to be upskilled and build on their knowledge and skills, and that's going to help the employee feel, I guess, valued because they see the business has expended a lot of energy and resources and money in terms of training them, and they're going to feel valued. That means they just want to achieve better outcomes for the business, and they're going to therefore be motivated in the long term and short term. In terms of support, again, they feel supported by the business, they have that relationship with the business, they're going to be motivated in the short term and the long term. And with sanctions, that's when you have your threat manipulation. So motivation is generally sort of, I guess, motivation. It's mostly motivation through fear, and so that's not very sustainable for the long term. And if the employee, even if you think about yourself as an employee, if you're constantly being threatened, then you're not likely to stay within the business for a very long time. So it's only going to really be effective in the short term. All right. Then we have our performance management strategies. So our first one is management by objectives. And this is just where a manager and an employee jointly sort of set their objectives and goals. And then at the end of the review period, performance is measured against those established objectives. So sort of just comparing your performance to those objectives and seeing how effective the employee has been in terms of achieving those objectives and in terms of the performance as well. Then we have our performance appraisals. So performance appraisals, really just looking at management assessing the performance of your employees is more of like the conventional, I guess, way of assessment. And so it just measures how well an employee has been at performing their job, provides feedback to employees, and then establishes plans to improve future performance. So the manager will sort of, I guess, observe how well the employee has been at performing at the job, provide the feedback, and then help the employee in terms of coming up with strategies to improve future performance. Then we have self-evaluation. Self-evaluation is sort of more so on the employee's side of things, where they kind of take that step to assess their own and rate their own performance in a number of areas. And ratings are then compared to those completed by the manager, and then the differences are sort of discussed from there. Then we have employee observation. Employee observation includes sort of collecting feedback relating to an employee's performance from other employees, managers, or customers. So it can really be an observation from any stakeholder. So a key example of employee observation is like a mystery shopper, because that's maybe another employee assessing an employee. So that's where it could literally, a mystery shopper could be anyone. It could be a manager, it could be an employee, it could be a shareholder. But basically they come in as a mystery shopper, so the employee is not aware of that they're being assessed. And then the mystery shopper sort of assesses them in terms of how they're being greeted, or how well the employees at doing their job, all of that. And then once that observation has been completed, then the employee might convey the results to a manager for the manager to then discuss with the employee. If it was a manager dressed up as a mystery shopper, then they would then directly sort of discuss it with the employee. Okay. And then we have termination management. With our termination management, we have voluntary and involuntary forms of termination. And as you can see, resignation and retirement are voluntary, and then redundancy and dismissal are involuntary. So when we're looking at all of these ones, resignation is when an employee leaves the workplace, usually to go to another job. So it's often when they get a better job offer, they resign from their current job and they leave that specific workplace to go to another one. Retirement is when an employee decides to leave the paid workforce entirely. And so they're kind of just, leaving the paid workforce and not really, going to another job in that sense. So they're leaving the paid workforce entirely. Redundancy is the termination of employment by an employer because the employer no longer needs a particular job to be done, or needs fewer people for the type of job. The job no longer exists. So it's literally the job that the employee was completing before no longer exists, because the employer no longer needs that particular job. And so the employee is let off because of that reason. All right. Then we have dismissal. So dismissal is termination due to incompetence or indiscipline. So it's literally kind of just like firing the employee due to reasons of incompetence or indiscipline. With these ones, you should also be aware of their transition issues and their entitlement issues. So a key entitlement issue is, like, for example, with resignation, having that notice provided to the employee from the employer. So that would be an entitlement issue of the employer. With redundancy, again, it would be the notice of termination as well, but this being provided from the employer to the employee. And then, even some transition issues. So with redundancy, maybe providing like outplacement services, or like the business assisting the employee in terms of finding like another job as well. Another key entitlement issue as well with redundancy is the redundancy package that employees are entitled to, and annual leave for resignation and retirement. Actually, all of them are entitled to accrued annual leave as well. All right, cool. Let's now look at participants in the workplace. So we have HR managers. They are just the bridge of communication between employees and employers. And they also have a lot of other roles as well in the workplace, such as being up to date with awards and sort of tailoring, coming up with strategies or acting accordingly if there has been a change in legislation. Employees, so their role is to prioritize themselves in negotiations with management. Obviously, they want to be achieving the best thing, the best working conditions, the best pay as well. Employer associations, they represent employers in the collective bargaining process, so they advise employers on their rights and responsibilities, and they lobby to the government in support of employers as well. With unions, they are basically the same as employer associations, but more for employees. So they negotiate for their members during collective bargaining process, and they provide support and advice to members about workers' rights as well. So other employees about what their rights are and educating them as well. With the Fair Work Commission, so they are responsible for creating awards, approving agreements, providing arbitrators or mediators. They are often sort of like they're probably one of the participants that have quite a lot of power, because they're responsible for creating awards for all of the different industries, approving those agreements, the enterprise agreements that are negotiated between like the employer and the employee, and sort of providing arbitrators and mediators as well in terms of like the workplace relation issues. This kind of links to what we were talking about before with the termination management, but these are the entitlements. So redundancy pay, that's when employees receive redundancy pay based on their continued period of service with their employer. Kind of talked about it before, so I don't want to repeat myself. Notice of termination was for redundancies when the employer has to provide to the employee. Resignation is when redundancy is when employer provides to employee. Resignation is employee to the employer. And then also payment of accrued long service leave. So an employee gets paid over their long service when they're terminated, and so it only applies to employees who've been at the business for at least 7 years. So that is applicable to all of them if they've been there for 7 years or more. Okay, let us look at awards and agreements and sort of comparing between both of those. So an award is a legally binding minimum requirement for wages and conditions of a specific industry. When we talk about legally binding, they're determined and reviewed by the Fair Work Commission every couple of years. And so a business absolutely has to abide by them. And if they don't, that's illegal. So it's unlawful, and they can get into severe trouble for not complying or abiding by those awards. The minimum requirements, so they must surpass the standards of wages and conditions set by the National Employment Standards. And it's sort of referred to as like a safety net for employees, because the business has an option of sort of complying with the awards or going above that. All awards are specific to an industry. So every industry will have its own awards, and currently there's 122. I feel like that number's probably grown now. But yeah, every industry has its own awards. Then we have an enterprise agreement. So this is a written collective agreement between the employer and employees at a workplace, which just sets up the terms and conditions of employment. So it's important to note with an enterprise agreement, it's only applicable to a specific workplace. So it only applies to a single workplace, because it's between the employer and an employee at a workplace. But with enterprise agreements, they're negotiated during the enterprise bargaining period, where industrial action is legal. So that kind of links to the idea of good faith bargaining, where I guess both parties sort of bargain in sort of like an ethical, fair manner. But it must be approved by the Fair Work Commission, and that's when they sort of, in assessing the agreement, they're going to conduct the better off overall test, just to ensure that the agreement meets the national employment standards, has a set grievance procedure, and also an expiry date as well. Enterprise agreements often go off awards, so they build above awards, and it's more specific to a workplace as well. Okay. Then we have dispute resolution. With dispute resolution, we have mediation and arbitration. Mediation is a formal method of dispute resolution, where an independent third party facilitates the discussion occurring between the disputing parties so that they come to their own resolution. So, in the case where if there's a dispute between the employee and the employer, there will be a mediator. So, a third party that comes in kind of facilitates that discussion so that it kind of encourages both parties to come to some sort of resolution or some sort of solution. With arbitration, this is sort of like the next escalation. So it's a step above that. And this is when both parties now kind of put their case forward to an independent third party who makes the final legally binding decision. And so that independent third party often is the Fair Work Commission, but you sort of now escalate it to like a court case where both parties sort of present their sides, present their stories, and then the Fair Work Commission then makes the decision in a non-biased perspective, and whatever decision they make is legally binding. So both parties have to follow that, otherwise it's illegal. All right, a quick review of the first two areas of study, which we've just completed. So you're a manager of a VCE tutoring center. You've just hired 10 new tutors who have no experience working at your center. Which of the following management styles would not be appropriate? Have a think to yourself. And I want you to also think, why would that management style would not be appropriate? Okay, hopefully you've all had a bit of a think about that. So participative management involves having employees make decisions. So it's not really a great idea if those employees are new and inexperienced. Sorry. So yeah, since it clearly states that tutors don't really have much of experience working at your center, you don't really want to give them decision-making power if they don't really know what they're doing. So I wouldn't go with that management strategy. Autocratic in this point, I would say, is more advantageous than persuasive because, again, especially since they're new, if the manager is just making decisions and sort of relaying that to the tutors, that's probably more effective. Okay, and then a quick little review question. So define resignation and outline one entitlement of an employee who has resigned. So this one's worth 2 marks. Have a quick read and then mark that one out of 2. Okay, so I would give this 1 out of 2 because this is a really key mistake that a lot of students make, but it's so important that you keep in mind your wording of your definition. So resignation is not when an employee leaves the workforce, it's when they leave the workplace. So if you say workforce, you're going to get a mark off because you're actually going to get no marks for that definition because that's incorrect. So workforce only applies to resignation. All right, amazing. Now we've finished content block 1, which is the first 2 area of studies. So let's now look at the the third area of study, which is all about operation management. So what is operations? Operations is literally the core of a business. So it's the actual work done from transforming your inputs into outputs. So the actual definition is it's really looking at the management of resources and functions within a business to achieve efficient output of finished goods and services in a way that adds value to customers and creates a profit margin for the business. So it's sort of considering and achieving the balance between how can we ensure that our output and services adds value to customers, but also can this be done in a way that is, I guess, efficient and effective for the business, so that we are able to achieve our business objectives. And this is when the idea of efficiency and effectiveness really comes in and ties in, because I know you were taught about efficiency and effectiveness in the first area of study. However, this is when I guess you really be tying these concepts in into this operations management. So when we're looking at efficiency / productivity, both of those terms kind of go hand in hand, but it's the rate at which outputs are generated from inputs. So if we're being highly efficient, that means that we're using less inputs for more outputs, and that means we're reducing our costs. For example, if we have efficient employees, the input that they're using less of is time, and they're creating more outputs for that. And so that's going to reduce costs, because maybe that means that they're getting their work completed quicker, and the business doesn't have to pay as much for their labor expenses, because the time that they take to complete tasks are reduced. So that could be an example of efficiency. So it's either reducing your inputs and creating more outputs, or using the same amount of inputs and creating more outputs as well. Okay, then we have effectiveness. So effectiveness is related to the degree of which objectives are achieved. So how well has the business actually been at achieving their objectives? So if they've been highly effective, they've made less errors, they're more efficient, they're less costs. So that reduces costs, and ultimately that achieves the objective of increasing profits. So with effectiveness, I would always encourage you to tie it to a specific business objective. All right. We have inputs with the key elements of operation system. We have our inputs, processes, and outputs. So when we're looking at inputs, processes, and outputs, these are some examples. So inputs could be raw materials, utility, labor, capital, information and knowledge, time. So literally anything that that is required to produce the final output. Then we have processes. So this is turning your inputs and then creating your outputs. So processes could be cutting, cleaning, ordering, packaging, serving. So literally using your inputs to create the final outputs, and then the output is obviously the final good or service. So it could be a meal, it could be jewelry, it could be a TV set, it could be a phone, it could be a house, it could be holiday information, it could be, making a bank account, it could be a medical diagnosis. So notice there that I've not just put, there isn't just physical and tangible outputs, there's also like intangible outputs, such as holiday information or a medical diagnosis. So something also related to like a service. Awesome. Okay, now I want you all to have a think about the key elements of a cafe's operation. So think about, a cafe. What would be their inputs? What would be their processes? And what would be their outputs? So I'm going to give everyone a minute to just have a think about this. If you want, you can write it down in your notes. So your inputs, label it inputs, processes, and outputs, and just sort of list it under each thing. Okay, hopefully everyone has had a bit of a think about the inputs, processes, and outputs of a cafe. Let's have a look. So the inputs would be, the actual employees themselves. It would be the coffee machines. It would be the milk. It would be, maybe the Java beans. It would be time as well. Processes would be actually, taking in, like pouring the milk into, I guess, the little thingy majiggy where they froth the milk, and I can't even think of the contraption, but like, um yeah, I guess frothing the milk, pouring the milk, pouring the pouring the coffee into the coffee cup, pouring the milk on top of the coffee, grinding the beans, all of that. Then the output is the final coffee. So that, hopefully that made sense, but just sort of think about like what are the materials, how the business uses those materials to transform it into the outputs, and then the output should be fairly straightforward. All right, now we need to also compare between a manufacturing and service business. So a manufacturing a manufacturer produces goods that are tangible, while a service organization produces services that are intangible. So when you think of a service, for example, a bank, they provide a service. And so that service is intangible because often they might give you banking advice, they might help you set up a banking account. All of that is intangible. Whilst a manufacturer, their production of goods are tangible. The manufacturer, they produces goods that can be stored and standardized, while service businesses, their services are difficult to store and are more so customized. So with a manufacturer, maybe you think of, for example, Yakult. All of their products, well, they have different product lines, but all of them are standardized. They're the same thing. So manufacturers is producing, thousands or hundreds of thousands of that particular good. So they're standardized, and they can also be stored. Kind of links to the idea of tangibility. So that just means they can be touched, held, or stored. Whereas with services, it's difficult to store. So since it's intangible, you can't touch, store, or hold it. But it's more so customized. So with the banking example again, everyone goes into the bank. They want to do different things. One person might want to, get a home loan. One person might want to set up a banking account or savings account. One person might want to renew their card. Another person might want to, I guess, maybe, cash in a check or something. So there's so many different things that organization provides, and therefore it's customized. And then we also have, with the manufacturing business, it involves minimal final customer contact, whereas with the service organization, it's a high degree of final customer contact. So with the manufacturer, they're just producing that particular good and then distributing it to stores where customers can purchase it. Whilst with service organizations, they like, it's a very high degree of contact with the customer. So people come into the bank, as an example, and they're sort of working with that employee who's providing the service, and so there's that high degree of contact. So manufacturing businesses, so they're generally produced and capital intensive. So it means that they have a lot of machinery. There's a lot of capital in terms of like the production and the processes stage of producing that good and the final output. And with the services, they're generally performed and labor intensive. So it's a lot to do with like employees. So again, banks, sorry, I keep going back to the bank example, but employees are the ones providing that banking information. They're helping the customers. So it's a lot to do with labor. And then manufacturing, so they involve production and consumption. So those two, production and consumption, are separate. So the manufacturer produces it, they distribute it, customers then buy it and consume the product. Whilst with service organizations, production and consumption occur simultaneously. So for example, customer goes into the bank, they want banking advice or they want to set up a savings account. They tell, the employee they want to set up a savings account. The employee helps them save up. They help them set up the savings account. And so while that's happening, like the employee, the consumption is happening simultaneously. So it's happening at the same time. So once it's set up, it's essentially the employee can also like the I don't want to say they consume the product because you can't consume a savings account, but you sort of get the idea where production and consumption are happening at the same time. Okay, then there's four main areas where the business can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of operations. So you have your technological developments, materials quality, and waste minimization. So under each of these things, here are a couple of strategies that you have. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them because I am going to go through them as well. But let's first look at technological developments. So we need to know 6 technological development strategies. So those are automated production lines, robotics, CAD, CAM, artificial intelligence, and also online services. I made a bit of a table here, just sort of describing all of those. With automated production lines, it's just a process requiring a reduced level of human input to function, where raw materials enter a series of workstations from which finished products leave. So if you think about, I know in year 12 for BizMan, we went to Yakult, we visited the Yakult factory, and they had automated production lines. So it would be where they would have stations where the bottle caps, so they had like little beads and they would then be shaped into like the Yakult bottles. And then those Yakult bottles would then be sucked up into one machine and then transferred into the main production line where they would then be filled. Once they were filled, then, the cap would then be put on them, then they'd be then taken to be packaged in with other bottles as well. So it's basically where the raw materials enter, and then there's a series of workstations which then transform that into like the final product, the final good. It also requires very minimal level of human input. So there's just a couple of people sort of just roaming around, making sure everything is sort of operating all right. Then we have robotics. This is just a form of technology which deals with design, construction, operation, and application of robots to create intelligent machines that can help assist humans. Computer-aided design. That's a computer software that allows businesses to simulate 3D designs without expending any physical resources, aiding the creation of both of product design, and the testing of modified product designs. So a lot of I guess CAD is used in architecture because it's not, I guess, feasible to, I guess, construct every single design, and so a lot of they use CAD in terms of just sort of simulating those 3D designs to sort of get a good idea of what it's going to look like. Then we have CAM. This involves automated control of the production process, including machinery, tools, and equipment by a computer. So it's literally looking at the actual, like the computer that operates the production process and the machinery. And then we have AI, the artificial intelligence, that refers to the machine learning algorithms, learning data to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence. And then online services. So sort of refers to the development of and maintenance of an accessible online business website. Maybe that might be to a portal to communicate with suppliers or, to communicate with customers. But yeah. All right. Then we have our materials management. So this is the control and coordination of an organization's inventory. And so inventory, when we talk about inventory, that's just the storage of raw materials, components, parts, works in progress, and finished goods. So something like that. It takes up storage and therefore it has cost. So inventory, you'll find that with materials management, a lot of the time, in order to be efficient, businesses don't want to keep things in inventory. They want to be making sure they're using it efficiently, so they're not just taking up storage, and maybe if it's perishable goods especially, they're not rotting away and producing waste in the business. And yeah, they must be controlled to maintain stock and balance out storage costs with businesses' needs. So they need to be effectively managed. So with materials management, we need to know 4 strategies. So we need to know forecasting, the MPS and MRP, and also the just in time as well. Forecasting. So when we're looking at forecasting, it's just about predicting and correctly ordering materials that are required inputs for the business's operation. So it's just about looking at past and present trends to predict, I guess, future business needs. For example, looks at using past and present data and trend analysis to ensure that the business orders the right enough of resources to meet demand. A key example is that with Yakult, they know that in the winter months, their demand increases significantly because people like to drink Yakult to protect their immune system and to increase their immunity. And so this year, they know to then increase production of Yakult during the winter so that they're able to make enough to meet the demand. So that would be an example of Yakult forecasting. So it's kind of like if your demand increases, then you also want to make sure that the amount of materials you order also increase too. All right, then we have the MPS and the MRP. So with these ones, they just involve the MPS involves setting out production requirements. So it just looks at it sets out exactly what is to be produced, how much of an item is to be produced, when items are needed to be produced by, and how the items will be produced as well. With the materials requirement planning, that's a planning process that supports the MPS, and it sets out the material requirements of the business's operating system, as well as supplier lead in time. So while the MRP more so focuses on the material requirements and sort of explicitly stating those, the MPS is more so how it's more so the production requirements. So how things are to be produced, how much of things are to be produced, etc. The advantages is that it ensures that enough product is made to meet demand, and so it reduces customer dissatisfaction rates, and also reduces waste associated with inventory that is not used in production as well. So because the business is explicitly outlining how much they need to produce as well in order to meet those demand requirements. Then a key disadvantage, however, is that it depends on a high level of communication, both within the business and to customers as well. And so that might not be the strength of all businesses. So it's the business and to customers and suppliers. And so it really relies on the business having good communication, and might not be the strength of all businesses. So yeah. And then we have just in time. So just in time is an inventory management strategy developed in Japan, and it involves the reduction of inventory levels in the supply chain, which reduces inventory costs. So it was first implemented by Toyota. However, these are just some key elements of just in time. It aims to reduce costs through the minimization of inventory. The whole premise of just in time is ensuring that materials arrive just as they're needed for production. And so small quantities of inputs are delivered more frequently to meet immediate requirements, so that there's no large stockpile, there's no, resources just sitting in inventory doing nothing. They're literally arriving, and as they arrive, they're used in production. Inventory, that means that inventory is replaced as it's used, and employee participation is required to identify and eliminate wasteful work practices. So, the business would then encourage employee participation to consider their inputs and how they sort of feel. With just in time, there's many advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages is that it reduces the storage space required for inventory, since there isn't much materials sort of being stored in inventory since they're used in production as they arrive. It reduces waste, and as stock does not sit in storage unused. Also reduces theft, because if there's less stock, less opportunity to steal stock as well. And it reduces insurance premiums because there are less products to be insured to. And increases liquidity, reduces the amount of money tied up to stock. I think the first 3 are probably like the most easiest to talk about. With disadvantages, key disadvantages are that it's dependent on reliable and frequent deliveries of materials. So it's really important that materials are arriving, because if they don't, that can delay the production of the outputs. Because if the business doesn't have its inputs, then it can't produce its outputs. So therefore, if there's a delay in the inputs, there's going to be delay in creating the outputs, and that can create a lot of problems because it impacts the business, the ability of the business to sell its goods and services and get that revenue, get that profit, all of that. It can also be quite costly to set up and maintain because it is frequent. It kind of links into the third point here, but usually the business must order from domestic suppliers, which may be more expensive. And so since it's frequent orders, the business has to sort of pay for transportation costs a lot more. There's a lot more transportation costs. And the business can't really order from international suppliers. Well, they can, but they're more so likely to order from domestic suppliers and local businesses, which might be a little bit more expensive as well. Bulk buying discounts can also be lost as well. Okay, so increased costs means there's less profits, decreased costs means more profits. Okay, let us now look at quality management. So quality is the degree of excellence of a good or service and its ability to satisfy the customer. The characteristics of good quality are, ensuring that it's a high standard or grade, it's reliable, it lacks the defects, it's durable, and there's a speed of delivery and service. With quality management, there's 3 key aims. So, just making sure that the business is obtaining consistency in terms of like the high standards of outputs. They're also to achieve, I worded that a bit weirdly. I was going to say, these are sort of like the aims of quality management. And so the aims of quality management is to obtain consistency with high standards of output, to achieve set quality standards, and to minimize waste and defect rates, and therefore to improve efficiency. And so with quality management, we have our 3 strategies, which are quality control, quality assurance, and TQM. We'll go through all of them really quickly. So with quality control, this relates to the checking of products and services over the production stages to ensure that they meet predetermined standards of quality. So basically, it's about the business setting benchmarks and comparing the sort of checking the products and services. So conducting inspections to ensure that they meet those benchmarks and sort of comparing that to the benchmarks. And if there are any issues, taking corrective action. So as I've set out here, it's about the business establishing the standards of quality, which are the benchmarks, then inspecting the output, comparing the inspection results to the established quality standards, and then taking corrective action if necessary. So fixing or throwing out particular things within the operations stage. So for example, with Yakult, I'm going to use the Yakult example, but they had some benchmarks that they had created is that each Yakult bottle needs to be filled up to a specific level because they need to weigh a specific amount. And so there needs to be consistency across all of that, because it's not fair if a customer gets 15 ml while another customer gets 10 ml. So it's really important that they're being very precise, and that is very consistent. And if they find that, okay, on a particular day that all of, the Yakult bottles are reaching 9 ml instead of 10 ml, then that's when corrective action needs to be taken, and they need to look at the machines that are being used, maybe change the settings on machines, maybe replace the machine if they're, defective, or if they're getting old, maybe conduct a check on the machine, get it repaired, to ensure that that is fixed so that the outputs do meet the benchmarks. Okay, then we have quality assurance. Quality assurance is the certification awarded to a business by an independent third party once they've achieved an established specific level of quality in the production of the goods or services. So this is where the business kind of proactively takes the steps to ensure that, they have the strategies in place to increase the quality of their goods and services, so that when an independent third party does come into the business and conducts an assessment, they're able to be awarded that certification. So that certification, in order to get the certification, the business has to prove that it's met those established standards. And it's a proactive process, like I mentioned, unlike quality control, which is more so reactive, because it's quality control focuses on the business uncovering a particular idea, or uncovering a particular defect or something. The defect has already occurred, but they're reacting to that and then fixing it. Then we have TQM. This is a holistic quality management approach that aims to achieve continuous improvement of production. So the continuous improvement of production, processes, goods, and services through the creative participation of all people in the organization. So it looks at sort of involving, it's a holistic quality management approach, as it's mentioned, sort of encouraging the participation of everyone in the business. It operates on 3 principles. The first one is continuous improvement, which looks at, ensuring that every stage of production can be bettered and there's no status quo. So it's literally just saying that, there's no such thing as just being perfect. The business has to continuously strive for improvement and betterness, if that's a word. The second principle is customer focus, and that is just ensuring the process provides customer with what aligns with or exceeds their wants, their needs, and expectations. So kind of looking at internal customers and external customers, with just ensuring that whatever the business is doing kind of meets their needs, their wants, and their expectations. The third one is worker participation. So that kind of looks at involving workers workers within the workplace to contribute their ideas in terms of improving quality. So workers are experts in their fields and should be consulted for ideas on improvement. One way that a business could do this is through quality circles. So ensuring that maybe meetings are conducted with workers every maybe fortnight or monthly, where it provides an opportunity for workers to express their sort of ideas, their inputs for quality, what they've noticed, things that they think that could be developed and worked on, and the business can then take on that feedback and use that to improve quality. With quality, you should be aware of like the reactive versus proactive approaches. With reactive, the only one you have is quality control, but then the other 2 are proactive. All right, let us now move on to waste minimization. Waste minimization is the process of reducing the amount of discarded resources created by the business and the operation system. So reducing waste just improves efficiency because less resources are used to produce outputs. And some common strategies could be, maybe sourcing higher quality materials, implementing technology, recycling materials, training workers, and improving processes. In terms of reduce, reuse, recycle, that is a strategy to reduce waste, and it seeks to use materials within the production, again, rather than completely discarding them. So reduce just means to minimize the waste occurring in the production. Reuse refers to items within production more than once. So reusing items in the production process. So for example, Yakult chemically treats their water to be reused in the production rather than discarding it completely. So that's a really good example of reusing. And then recycle means having a new use for an item instead of throwing it away completely. You also have lean management, and that's a business approach that aims to maximize customer value, but also reduce waste and improve efficiency and effectiveness. We have pull, and that is just essentially where the level of customer demand sort of pulls the production system. So it's just production of the good or service is only started when the customer places an order. So the customer order pulls at the production system with a demand. Then we have tact, and that's where the operation process seeks to create a rhythm whereby all steps in the production of the good or service are synchronized to create a continuous flow. Zero defects, that's where the operations process strives for perfection by continuously improving until it achieves zero defects. So really just kind of striving for continuous improvement and achieving no defects in the production process. And then one-piece flow. So it's also known as continuous flow, but it's a system that aims to eliminate idle time, so it's wasted time that occurs between stages of production. Awesome. All right. Then we have CSR. Corporate social responsibility is a commitment by an organization to conduct its business in an ethical manner that exceeds legal requirements and aims to minimize negative impact on the environment, society, and economy, as well as stakeholders. So we need to tie in CSR with inputs, processes, and outputs. So when we're looking at CSR for inputs, these are some examples. So the business could use maybe green technology options, using green energy such as light bulbs, solar panels, and green equipment. They might even want to think about the suppliers and source from ethical, responsible, environmentally sort of sustainable suppliers, and maybe even changing their materials. So changing their material so it fits with, so it's more sustainable. They would also want to make sure that suppliers are paid in fair and reasonable time. Maybe using local suppliers, that's a really good one, because using local suppliers reduces transport pollution and increases local employment as well. Processes, so using practices that reduce waste, recycling, reusing resources during production. That UCOL example is a good one. Green energy technology used throughout production process, and retaining production and processes in Australia. So that just helps to reduce transport pollution and increase local employment as well. And then we have outputs. So with outputs, ensuring that their quality makes them fit for purpose, marketing is honest and fair, pricing is fair, don't want to be deceiving customers in any way, and then even packaging use should be biodegradable and has minimal environmental impact as well. The outputs shouldn't harm the community, so they shouldn't be dangerous and they shouldn't be environmentally harmful either. All right, and then we have our global considerations. Global considerations, we need to know global sourcing of inputs, overseas manufacturing, and global outsourcing. So with the global sourcing of inputs, this is when a business imports the resources they require for their production process from an overseas non-Australian organization. So the advantages of this is that it takes advantage of the comparative advantages, cheaper labor costs, and economies of scale. So it might be a lot more cost efficient for a business to import resources from another country, because, in Australia it might be very expensive. However, there are some hidden costs, so they can be quite costly. There might be some corporate socially responsibility risk, because if the organization they're importing from sort of engages in sort of exploitation and exploiting workers, that can impact that business's reputation if they're, getting business from that company. And also loss of control and loss of Australian jobs as well. Overseas manufacturing, that's when the entire production process literally just occurs outside of Australia, takes advantage of, again, the comparative advantages. It's a lot more cheaper. However, can be costly. There are some CSR risks, and then there's a loss of local employment as well. And then global outsourcing. This is when a business uses other organizations from Australia, from outside of Australia, to undertake certain non-production related business functions. So some examples of outsourcing could be, a lot of businesses outsource like their call centers, their website development, their marketing. You might have heard that, some companies like Apple, they have call centers set up in, Singapore, India, and so that's an example of outsourcing. And that takes advantage of better expertise and comparative advantages. Maybe, Singapore or the people in Singapore have a really good knowledge of, technology and the functionings of technology, or they're able to learn quite quickly. And so, they might be taking advantage of like the expertise of the people in the country. And again, there might be some disadvantages in terms of like CSR risks, loss of control, Australian jobs, and even potential loss of intellectual property. So, sort of just keeping in mind that whenever you do engage in some sort of global business, that there is always a loss of Australian jobs, but also CSR risks, especially if you do not investigate, um, or yeah, that businesses that you're the business that you're like the business that you're, I guess, trading with, um, what their practices are and how they conduct their business. I've kind of gone through this, so I'm not gonna repeat myself, but it's just looking at the advantages and disadvantages of global sourcing of inputs and overseas manufacturing, and then again global outsourcing. It's just when, yeah, some non-related business function is being given to another organization outside of Australia to undertake. So something like marketing, accounting, information technology, etc. Okay, so this is just a review question of Area Study 3. Explain the importance of operation management to meet the business objective of increasing profit. In your answer, refer to a contemporary business case study. So this one's worth 3 marks. I'll give everyone maybe a couple of minutes just to have a quick read of this and think about how many marks you'd give it. Okay, so hopefully everyone has given that one a read. This one will probably get 1 out of 3, just because Tesla can't be used as a case study. Remember that it has to be a business from the last 4 years, and it has to be a Australian business as well. Yeah, this only focused on cost reduction, not increased revenue. So the question asks you to sort of link it to the business objective of increasing profits. So it's really important that you also talk about increased revenue as well. Okay, I am going to quickly skip through this one just because I'm a bit wary of time. But we can go back to these ones in case we do get some time towards the end of the lesson, but definitely do give this one a go. it just is another mark the answer question, but have a read of this one. This one was about evaluating the global outsourcing. And then I've also included some annotations as well. All right, amazing. So we've done all of Unit 3 of BizMan. I'm going to now go through sort of like exam sort of strategy, how I'd go about with your shaping a strategy in terms of practice exams. But essentially, the ultimate form of exam preparation is practice questions and practice exams. So when you do a practice exam, it's really important that you complete an exam without notes. I feel like the first one or the first two ones that you complete, I think it's okay to have your notes with you. However, the next ones that you do have, you should complete them without notes. But definitely you should be doing more practice exams without notes than with notes. Initially, you can refer to them a little bit. However, it's important that you are actually revising the content beforehand, before you do your practice exams. It's also important that you yourself go in and mark your answers, because if you're rereading your questions, it allows you to critically think about your answer. And that skill is so important when you're in SACs and exams, because when you're able to critically think, you're able to be like, oh, I didn't explain this. I didn't include the how part of this link. And so then you're able to then go in and add to your answer, so that you're able to then get the mark. But yeah, mark your answer, and then you can get your teacher/tutor to mark them, and to then give you a little bit of feedback as well. And then the third step is determine which questions and areas you struggle the most in, and then you can actually use that as like a guide in terms of how you want to revise and what you need to revise for the exam or your SAC. And then you can reattempt the question. When I would actually do my practice exams, I would read through all the questions and I would complete them. But I would actually, if there was a question that I was really struggling with, I would actually highlight it so that I knew that I need to revise that particular content. And even once I completed the answer, I would then reattempt the question so that I felt a lot more confident and to tackle that question and sort of with the content as well. So the main question, how many practice exams should you do? The answer is as many as you can. So there's no like limit in terms of how many you should do, but you should really be aiming for as much as you can. But it's also important to remember that it should be quality over quantity. So there's no point sort of crushing out like 5 practice exams in a row, because it's likely that you've made the same mistake in all of those practice exams. Rather, complete a practice exam, like have a read through it, mark it yourself, give it to a teacher, ask them what they think, give them an opportunity to give you feedback, and then use that feedback to maybe rewrite specific questions. Just because through that, where you went wrong, you've actually practiced implementing that feedback, and then you can then maybe give it back to your teacher to have a read of your new and improved answer, and then she can be like, oh, this was good, or be like, hey, maybe, you could have done this, you could have focused on this part of my feedback a little bit more. But I think getting feedback from your teacher and rewriting answers is a really good way of ensuring that you're not making the same mistake the next time you complete a practice exam. But the recommendation is at least 10 practice exams, with 5 or so at least under like strict timing and exam conditions. Practice exams, and I think just doing practice questions in general, are really your best form of study. Practice exams are good because it allows you to think under pressure and under those time conditions, which is a very important thing to do in your SAC and your exam. So it's really important that you're able to smash out all those questions, and also have time to edit and reread your answers too. There's no set number, but again, you should be aiming to do practice exams until you're confident in your knowledge and have a few specific areas to improve in. Okay, how to ace BizMan. So it's really important that you have a system for notes. So have stuff working to your own advantage and manage it in a way that helps you. I think everyone has a different way of organizing their notes. So don't just do what your friend's doing, do what works for you. And maybe you start off the year taking notes on your laptop, but then you realize maybe it's more effective for me to handwrite notes, and that's completely okay because you're doing something, you're figuring out what's working for you. But in my case, my main notes were through a set of quiz cards, and I had another notebook for questions and answers. So in class, whenever I would have a question, I'd write it in that notebook just so that I would remember to ask my teacher and follow up on that. And I would also write my notes by hand because I think that was like the best way for me to really understand what I was writing and thinking. It's also important to be on the good side of your teacher because they are ultimately the ones who are marking your things. And sometimes, and if you're lucky, they might even give you some sack hints. So that's why you always want to be on the good side of your teacher. And also get on top of your definitions early. I feel like definitions are really important. So do really try to, get a start on them early in terms of, understanding them and memorizing them. Ask every question you have. Any unasked question is potentially throwing exam marks. I know that, whenever there was a question that I did not ask and it would come up in the exam, I would really kick myself for it because I was like, if I just asked this question to my teacher, I would have gotten the answer. I would have known what to do in this situation, and therefore I'm not jeopardizing myself in terms of like losing marks. So literally any question you have, ask your teacher, ask your tutor, because that's what they're there for. So really make sure you, take advantage and capitalize on that. Use your own work experience to your advantage or make it up. So especially if you do have a job, I feel like a lot of these things that we learn in BizMan, you can kind of reflect and think about how it applies to your own life. So definitely use your own experience as a basis in terms of giving examples. And even if you don't have a job, that's so fine. You can also make it up. I did not have a job in year 12, so I would always make my examples up. But that kind of links to the idea of always include examples into your answers as well. Okay, so again, a bit of a mark the answer question, but discuss partnerships as the type of business. This is 4 marks. One advantage is that partnerships are easy to set up. Another advantage is that they offer great access to capital to set up. However, one disadvantage of a partnership is that it has unlimited liability. And then the disadvantage is that partnerships lack perpetuity. How many marks out of 4 should this answer receive? Probably 1 out of 0 if your examiner is in a bad mood. And why is that? Because I feel like they've just kind of listed the advantages and disadvantages. They haven't really elaborated on their responses. So this is probably something that the student could do to sort of uplift and increase the quality of their response. So for example, just saying one advantage is that partnerships are easy to set up, ensuring higher time efficiency. The second one, in terms of how it offers greater access to capital because multiple owners are contributing to their finances. So just going that step further so that it kind of links to the how and the why, rather than just being like partnerships are easy to set up, partnerships have greater access to capital. That's not enough detail for a discuss question. For the disadvantage, they've gone on to then talk about unlimited liability. So unlimited liability is when owners and businesses are considered separate legal entities, and therefore, business asset, both personal and business assets can be seized to pay off the debt. Another disadvantage is that partnerships lack perpetuity, and that refers to the ability of a business to survive in the long term because they can easily dissolve if partners no longer wish to work together. Another really important thing with BizMan is handwriting. So if your handwriting is bad, it's really important that you fix it now, because if your teacher or the examiner cannot read your handwriting, they cannot understand what you're saying, you're going to get 0 because they're not able to understand and read what you're saying. It's also really important that you answer your questions fully. So whenever I write a question, whenever I answered a question, I would always reread the question, then reread my response and be like, okay, have I actually answered the question fully? If I hadn't, then, add in a bit to your answer to make sure that you're answering all parts of the question. Also really important that you highlight the task words. The task words are really important in terms of for you to understand what you need to include in the answer. So if it's an evaluate question, you know to include advantages, disadvantages, and your final opinion. If it's a discuss, you're just looking at advantages and disadvantages. If it's a compare, you're looking at similarities and differences. If it's a distinguish, you're looking at differences. So it's really important that you're familiar with your task words and always highlighting your task words in your question. All right, so that brings us to the end of our lecture today. Let me have a look and see if there's anything else. Yeah, I reckon if you have any other questions, like, do let me know. Type it into the chat, and I will be like actively on the document. But yeah, hopefully everything made sense and it was very helpful. But yeah, hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the year and, enjoys, BizMan and goes well with all of their SACs and the exam. And I hope to see everyone soon in the future. Thanks, everyone.